long process of recognizing that there is no hot potato. There's nothing to forgive because there was no harm done. And this is hard when you're a victim.
Yeah. This is The Smoke Up. My name is Malachi Juarez. This is usually a show where I get stoned with my friend and talk about current events. But today you're my friend. Of course, you're not obligated to smoke anything. I hope I don't offend you. I will be smoking this cigar.
No problem. No problem.
We're going to talk about a couple kind of semi-serious topics today because you're a life coach. And so I have some deeper questions to ask you. I suppose you could probably say it that way. But real quick, you're welcome to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Billy, and I started talking with Malachi because I made a video about meditation on my YouTube channel. And this was many months back, and Malachi wanted to have a podcast episode with the friend who unfortunately can't join us today. But I invited him to my email, and then most of the times these offers aren't really followed up. But then it took a few months to get here, but I'm super glad that we are actually able to talk about it now because hey, again, not many of these like, oh, we should do that sometimes actually transpire into events.
Yeah.
So I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, I actually have one interview on the burner right now that I reached out to at the same time as you, and I'm expecting them to come through eventually. But you came through right away, and you're the second person to be like straight through that email and rock on. So real quick, you're a life coach, but in a lot of your content, you sound very educated. What's your level of education, just for the audience?
I have a master's of engineering in computer science.
Okay. Yeah, that's more educated than I am. I am a high school graduate. I got my diploma through an online program after almost dropping out in ninth grade. But I hope to continue my education later. I know like it's a lot of money that you end up owing in those student loans. So that's the biggest thing I'm afraid of. I'm hoping that America's laws change soon enough, so maybe it's easier to go to college.
Yeah, and just the fact that I got the education doesn't necessarily mean I'm smarter. It just means that I went to school for a certain amount, and and to be completely honest with you, like I'm not that much of an academic. I just have really very low passion in when I was a student. I had very little passion in studying, but I'm a Korean citizen, so I need to serve in the army. But
Okay.
at the time, uh, if you have a master's or above in a STEM related field, you have a
Okay.
chance to be drafted as a researcher instead of a like a
Like
private
infantry.
like yeah. So I was like, you know what? Looking at my personality and looking at my build, I probably will not. And I'm already super old because most people take a break from school to do the army first, but I didn't do that. So I'm already like super old and frail compared to the other people. So I was like,
Right.
my only like chance of surviving the army is I have to be a researcher. So that's primarily why I did it. So yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone as less just because they have a less diplomas than me. If I didn't need to go to the army, I probably would have taken the same route. So I completely
And
understand.
I really like that perspective. On the show, we tend to be pro-intellectual, anti-elitist, and I know academia. It's a good mix of both. So I definitely don't disparage academia in the same way my co-host might. We have different opinions on that, but I I'm definitely also aware that, there is a bit of elitism with that. So you were a foreign exchange student in America?
Yeah, and my life story is a little bit like ping-pongy, so I went back and forth Korea and the United States quite a bit. But citizenship-wise, I'm still a Korean citizen. Got my green card in 2020, so but soon I'm gonna be applying for citizenship in the United States, so we'll see when that happens. But yeah, citizenship-wise, I'm Korean, but I just have been living in America for a really long time.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Okay, so I'm starting to get a little stoned already. So I have a completely off-topic question now already.
No problem. Go ahead.
Um, is it weird to know two different languages? Like, do you think in a different language than you're speaking when you're talking to me, or is it all English when you're talking to an English speaker and Korean the opposite way?
So for bilingual, the language doesn't usually mix. So it's purely Korean context, purely English context. And but where it gets a little bit blurry is at home I speak Korean with my wife, right? But then I'm home right now having this interview with in English, right?
Right.
But then my wife might knock in and be like, "Hey, can you take care of blah blah blah?" And then I might have to reply in Korean. So at those moments I can tell that there's a context switch.
Right. Does it feel like
And
you're shifting gears in your head, or is it just a muscle thing now?
it's a shifting gear, but I think this particular phenomenon is a little bit specific to East Asian languages like Korean and Japanese because Korean and Japanese have honorifics, right?
Yeah.
So
So what does
English
that mean
doesn't.
exactly?
Yeah, so if I'm addressing and talking to someone older, I can't use that to same words when
Okay.
I'm talking to someone
So
younger,
there's a
and vice
formal
versa.
language and a casual language, kind of.
Yeah. But for example, suppose I spoke like Spanish and English, right? Then I think the context switch would require less kind of a actual like, oh, I'm shifting kind of a feeling.
So that's why
But
we get stuff
because
like Spanglish and mixed families.
yeah. But like mixing Korean and English is a little bit different because like do you mix in the informal version of Korean with English or do you mix in the formal version of with English and
Right.
such?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would assume culturally mixing in the formal seems like it might be like some type of disrespectful to the original language. Is that?
But it's so funny because in Korea there's a lot of American culture that's trying to settle in more and more, right?
Yeah.
So Korea is traditionally a very hierarchical society, and but we have had an explosive economic growth, and now we're starting to feel the side effects of prolonged hierarchical culture.
Yeah, I can
So
see that.
now in the corporate world, they're like, you know what? We should be more like American companies. We should be more like, just parallel relationships. And then they try to implement that inside Korea. So they have this really weird hybrid of trying to communicate like in English tones, but then they have to convey that in a Korean formal tone, so it
Okay.
ends up not being parallel at all. So these like kind of funky things are happening in Korea
Yeah,
these
I
days.
could see that. I guess the equivalent would sort of be like going into like a corporate setting and using like being like what's up or sup, saying stuff like that, like saying
Yep,
really
yep,
informal language in business settings.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I mean, I'm an American, so of course my biggest imprint from Korean culture in general is uh, uh, North Korean demonism in America and K-pop. So that's the extent I know. So I know with K-pop, it seems like it's definitely a big helming of American culture and then sort of making it your own to some extent. And
Yeah, it's like absolutely wild because when I was growing up, people number one either didn't know what Korea was at all, or number two, people thought I was North Korean when I was growing up.
right,
And everybody just assumed I'm Chinese or Japanese, but nobody really asked me if I'm Korean. But these days, I have like people actually starting discussions with me. Hey, like, did you see this K drama? I'm like, no, I don't watch Korean TV. But
yeah,
it's like the conversation has flipped. But K-pop wise, I think the biggest American influence there is like hip hop. For
okay,
some reason, Koreans in the early 90s and late 80s, they've been infatuated with the black music like R&B and hip hop, right? So a subcategory of R&B called New Jack Swing, it's still like really prevalent in Korea, just like how the world has moved on from techno, but then Japan like took techno to like the next level.
Yeah.
Korea took some of the really like black music to its own spin. So I think in terms of K-pop, something that really made American music into Korean is the legacy and influence of hip hop and R&B.
Yeah, and I'm sure like there's probably a deep conversation there to be had about like how mixing led into digital audio workspaces leads into modern audio engineering that isn't
Mm-hmm.
related to like physical instruments being played. But yeah, that I mean that's probably a big conversation that like I'm not even qualified to have. But yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure a big reason for the lack of differentiation with Koreans in prior America was probably like I know old war vets, they refer to the Korean War and they refer to Koreans just Koreans. A lot of them use slurs too, but
Hmm.
because it's people from that age. But nowadays I feel like propagandistically North Korea is like it's specifically used as a anti-communist boogeyman. It's a whole you can get into a whole argument as to how actual much they follow communism or Marxism or anything like that, but they're more of a modern boogeyman in the USA versus back when it was just fighting regional wars in the area as like I don't know if we were NATO when we did that, but pre-NATO or NATO type of things like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
again, conversations I'm not qualified for. But yeah, so just a little bit about me, so because I know so much about you now. I'm sort of a amateur producer to some extent. I create this podcast. I produce music. I am a currently a stay-at-home dad. I'm probably going to enter as a student in sociology and political science. But until then, I'm just sitting here, sort of doing this and making instrumentals. But lately, I've been going on walks, and I found a family of kittens under a bush in a abandoned trailer in my park, and so I have been trying to work to get them and foster them, but it's really difficult because they're. Do you know much about the like ecological damage that cats do in the U.S.?
Oh, in the US, I'm not really aware.
So they're particularly bad here. Like I know people argue that like I don't know how it is in East Asia or mainland, but as far as like Europe goes, cats don't have quite as large of an ecological impact. But in the U.S., they kill hundreds of thousands of birds every year, and it's not necessarily the number that matters. It's whether they're like killing off like endangered species in specific like cul-de-sacs. But so it's like a really big problem here, and they breed like crazy. And but people don't seem to understand that, and they think like, oh, I have to go out and I have to feed these homeless cats because they have nowhere to go. And so I get into an argument with the maintenance man of the trailer park about these cats and how they are bad for the environment. And he's like, oh no, they aren't bad for the environment. And I'm just like, okay, well, I'm gonna trap these cats. And he's like, okay, well, if you trap them, I want a black and white one. I'm like, okay. And I talk to his boss, and I tell her to tell him, don't feed these cats. I got the cats. I'm gonna take care of the cats because, in order to trap an animal, the only way to do that effectively is with food, and they can't be fed constantly by the whole neighborhood in order to be hungry and go into those traps. And the other day I go there, and there is a pile of cat food under this house, and I grab it, I throw it away, and I write a little note on a piece of cardboard and leave it under the house, and I just leave in a huff. And yep, that's a little bit about me. That's my personality in a nutshell. Maybe not clearest communicator, but uh, I'm here for pushing through whether or not people find it maybe informal or inappropriate to put myself in there. Because, of course, it's his job to maintain the trailer park, but I'm not going to let him just feed these cats outside and let them breed and all that. So, so, so a little bit to show like I have a goofy side too. It's not coming out as much now that I'm thinking about the cats. I'm getting a little serious, but uh, uh, all of this is to sort of say like I sort of might have controversial opinions or do things a little differently than people prefer, and might make them uncomfortable, which I think is probably reflects in the podcast by like sort of the theming of it, and the whole idea behind it sort of is it's just trying to simulate sort of hanging out with your friends, college age friends, whether or not people are drinking or doing drugs is another thing, but people like to socialize. They like to use substances to socialize. How do you feel about using substances to socialize, even if it's just alcohol? How do you feel about that subject?
Yeah, I mean, as a Buddhist, there's like 5 rules to follow, and well, even but in Buddhism, everything is ultimately void and meaningless, right? So these rules are also not like to be set in
Not
stone. Like
hard
it's not
rules.
like, yeah, it's not like you're gonna go to Buddhist hell if you don't follow these rules, right? That's sort of ridiculous. But anyway, one of them is like you can drink and you can do whatever you want, but just don't like do it to the point where you lose yourself because it makes it's so much easier for you to break the rest of the four, right?
Right.
So here I am trying to live this life of conscious life and develop my self connection, and then I get intoxicated, and then I just like that's too much of a karma to pay for like one little
Right.
action,
I
right?
can see
So
that it
Buddha,
disconnects you. Uh, there's the Alcoholics Anonymous program in America and sobriety. How that works. People feel like falling off the wagon is a pullback,
mm,
but you can continue. Sorry about that.
yeah, no worries. So I mean, so I do casually drink, but it's Koreans have this concept called banju, and it means like a side dish drink. So it's like European
Okay.
like wine pairing, you know.
Yeah.
So I have a side dish drink, but then after that, like I don't. I don't want to be intoxicated
Right.
because like it just doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I'm not a big drinker either.
Mm.
I do that same thing. Sometimes I'll have an occasional drink with a meal. Um, Here, it's very, 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 very common to drink. Drinking is probably the least stigmatized drug in American history at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in due to the prohibition and the combination of prohibition and alcohol being the white man's drug, because of course the people who were anti-prohibition included people with power during that time. There were no big Mexican senators in American history trying to keep the legalization of marijuana.
Yep.
But
Yep.
of course there were powerful people who were against prohibition, and also there were very uncouth figures who were pro prohibition, including the Ku Klux Klan of America. They were a
Mm-hmm.
big anti-drinking, anti-Catholic, Protestant, anti-black organization. So it's sort of tied into reactionary politics a lot to stigmatize alcohol, but it doesn't seem to be that way for a lot of drugs, including cannabis, which is sort of my biggest focus. I know a variety of people who use a variety of drugs to varying extents of success. I know quite a few people whose lives were ruined by addiction. My mother's life, my father's life was ruined by alcohol addiction. And, one has recovered and one quite hasn't. But I don't necessarily think that this is the result of substances themselves as much as psychology and reward systems. So I guess something I would sort of dip into from there is what is your perspective on whenever something is separated from being a daily substance that someone is dependent on to a medicine to an addiction? What what do you think would be like the biggest differentiating factors between those three things?
So, ultimately, right? We are alive, which means we have a mechanism that sort of self-sustains until it runs out of resources, yeah?
Yeah.
So we already have like fat and we all already have all the nutrients somewhat stored in our body. So which is what allows us to kind of go on for like days without eating and days without drinking
Right.
water. So we have this way of consuming ourselves. Okay. And as long as we keep doing that, we reach our natural sort of timeline going from birth to death. Yeah. And
Okay.
who knows? We might be ill because of some like condition or whatever. But everything that gets born dies eventually. But it's about what happens in the middle, right? Okay. So now that we established that, there are conditions that make that natural order of the resolution of life kind of fail early in advance, right? So
Right.
what I mean by early in advance is suppose I have a kidney failure, right? So the role of a kidney is to sort of filter the, water in my body, right?
Yeah, it's to sustain you.
But the role of a kidney is different from the role of the heart, right? Because the heart is more about the pumping blood. And it's
Okay.
different from the liver because the liver is about like detoxing things and so on. And digestion is from like intestines or whatever.
Yeah, they
So
all serve a different utility.
yes, but because they are all part of life, they serve a function related to life, right? But when I say I have a kidney failure, right? That means this part that has a role is not performing that role. So if I have something that if I have an organ that is supposed to fulfill this role, but it's not, then I am in the category of ill, right? I'm sick.
Right.
So that is medicine, yeah? Relieving that is medicine. Okay, so if I can't see really well and I get LASIK, that's sort of in the gray area, right? Because, like, I can see, just not clearly. I can see better. I can see clear. But what's the perfect vision, right? What's qualifies as good enough or not? Well, because we live in a society with other people, we set a standard, and different cultures have different metrics on like what good enough vision is, and then with that standard, with that social standard, you can apply a medicine to go at least up to that level. So it's a little bit like, it's not as clear cut as like kidney failure, get the, blah, 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 right? Okay, so that's the medicine. And now we have a biological operation and we also have a spiritual or mental kind of a domain inside of us, yeah?
Yeah.
There's an entire world in here. And in there is what allows us to be resolved. It's what allows us to be confident. At the same time, it allows us to be fearful. It allows us to be joyful. It allows us to be sad and everything in between, yeah? So, the great quality about this mental organ that we have is a resilience. So, when I press it, it leaves an imprint, but then it bounces back. There's this kind of a plasticity inherent in a functioning brain, right? Which is why you can have an intense craving for something. And then once you kind of sit it out, suppose you can't because of some like, situation or whatever, you're in a plane or whatever and you can't smoke, it subsides, right? Like you don't feel that craving for the entire 12-hour flight.
Right.
You have brief moments of interruption of that feeling.
Yeah. As someone who
And
quit smoking
that's
cigarettes, I perfectly understand that what you're talking
yeah,
about. Yeah.
yeah. So now some people's brains have that part kind of like over time deduced, that like plastic part, that resilient part, due to many different reasons, right? Some may be like as physical as like they got hit in the brain. Some may be due to like early onset trauma, especially complex PTSD starting from an early age affects the development of brains. And so these things now, again, with the kidney examples, it prevents your ability to be like neuroplastic. It prevents your ability for your brain to kind of like reset to kind of a homeostatic level, whatever that is for you. When that's the case about your usage, then it falls under the addiction. Like when you literally, when your default state is the craving, right? You can't ever bounce back to a state where you're like calm and you feel like, if you can't have a single second of where you're like, you know what, I'm fine right now, that means like something has dipped, and that we treat as ill, like it's something
Right.
is malfunctioning.
Yeah. Right. It's the same type of failure as with an organ.
Yeah, and then the rest is like, hey, I want to work out, so powder, good, it's a supplement, right? Hey, I want to have a good time. Fuck, that feels good, right? So
Right.
the rest are just kind of like do what you want. It's whatever you want to do. Like Buddha doesn't really have any guidelines around that, but it's just that in Buddhism we really like to minimize things and look at the essence of it, right? And that's why I talk a lot about role. What role is this playing? So right now, this is like if we are off of this call, we're friends.
Right.
In my YouTube channel, you're my viewer, but right now, in this instance, you're the host and I'm a guest, right? So for me to suddenly be like, so Malachi, what the fuck do you think about XYZ? Like, that's weird
Right. Right.
because I'm mixing roles.
Okay.
Yeah.
And okay, so I'm gonna try to remember all of what you said and come back to parts of it. So, with um, no, this is funny. Okay, so going back to the a whole cultural context and socialization of everything, right? So, like your example, like if I'm getting it correctly, so we use coffee as a stimulant to get up every day to go to work. But say if that was in an environment where uh, you're, and the going to work thing is considered a virtue in our society, right? But if you're in a context where, the virtuous thing in your society is to rest and sleep all day, then it would be culturally out of context to drink that coffee. And that's why it would become stigmatized. But if you drink that coffee to so much excess or need it in order to function as a baseline, then that's when you're addicted, right? So, in the context of it being A, culturally and socially recognized as acceptable, and B, having utility, that's when it is, and C, not being overly reliant, that's when it is a medicine.
Well, medicine is if you actually have trouble functioning, and suppose you know that sudden sleep syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and suppose caffeine relieves that, right? So, like, again, if you have sudden sleeping syndrome, like or sleepwalking, that's something like not functioning in your
Right.
life part, right? If caffeine is relieving that, then it's medicine.
So it's medicine when it brings you to homeostasis,
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of.
It allows you to other a state where you can be like kind of like functioning, whereas
Okay.
by default you won't be.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, so this is perfect. So now that we've sort of established what medicine is, what addiction is, we could sort of get into the rest of this conversation. Let me go get up my sheet. Um, oh, okay. Um, so back to the original conversation that brought you here. Um, Sort of what I did during the conversation. Um, Yeah, just to make it clear, I'm a materialist, atheist, secularist. You know, I don't follow any religion. I'm like very much like by the numbers kind of guy. But so when I think of meditation, and this will make sense with the medicine context in a second. When I think of meditation, I think of very like the Western non uh, um, uh, orientalized version of meditation, which is like what a cognitive behavioral therapist would tell you to do, which is just a practice of mindfulness, basically, right? Where you sit there and you try to calm your mind when you have like an anxiety disorder or something, and it's a therapeutic process. But there's also there's like sort of three ways that meditation is viewed. There's that way, the materialist way. Then there's the orientalized American way, where they think, where some people think it's a sort of magic with a lot of like Eastern things. Same thing as like there are medical benefits to acupuncture, but a lot of people think that it's sort of a superior form of medicine to Western medicine, when in reality there's just medicine and then there's non-medicine, right? And so that's the second version, and then there's the third version, which is like I think the historical, actual, like not actual necessarily, but the historical, cultural, where everybody's pulling it from, the Buddhist idea of meditation. Sort of elaborate on what meditation is to Buddhism and to a Buddhist.
Yeah. So meditation is it's actually very simple. It's it's relaxed focus. And so Buddha, remember that Buddhism is about walking the middle path instead of two extremes, because extremes tend to be two. So on one end, right? When you're too relaxed, it's good because you're away from all the stressors of your life, right? So if you're category number one of like that Western kind of view of medicine of like cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to you, my therapist, I'm like, I'm so stressed right now. Like I have this interview coming up, and like, so I need to take a chill pill, right? I need to
Right.
relax. Okay. So I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna try and forget about that, and then I need to relax. So I'm like sitting in my recliner, and I'm like, okay. And then I lie back. And then now, like, when I go to the extreme of relaxation, the benefit is that I stray really far away from stress, yeah?
Right.
But as a side effect of that, now I'm trying to think of like get my mind like in one, I'm trying to follow my thoughts, and I'm trying to think like calming, peaceful thoughts, and then I'm gonna sleep.
Right.
Okay, so that means, if for me to kind of actually use my mind to talk myself into calmness and talk myself into like, like relaxation, talk myself out of stress, I need some kind of alertness, right? So suppose I'm gonna stand up, but now, because of this, I go a little bit away from the too relaxed, so I'm alert. But now I just fall into the looping,
Right.
loop de loop of thoughts.
You're gonna start feeling stress again.
Yeah. So meditation meets in the middle, and it's just this. I'm at an appropriately amount of relaxation, which is sitting most of the times, simply because it's the halfway between lying down and standing up. So I'm here, and I'm not just slouching and just kind of doing this. I'm sitting down, but I'm maintaining some amount of focus by keeping my posture upright. So it's all the same concept. I'm relaxed, but now, so then what do I do in meditation when I'm closing my eyes? And this is where the branches of meditation happen, but they all lead back to one thing. I focus on one thing. Instead of focusing on like, okay, but if I do this, but what happens if I do this and then that? So that is like contemplation, right? That's like sitting
Right.
down and thinking. That's not the aim of meditation. So what does focusing on one thing look like? So I'll tell you three examples. So number one is like anapana, which is like the most common form of meditation I start people on. And it's just sitting down and you're just focusing on your breath going in and out through your nostril, right? And so what will realistically happen? You're gonna close your eyes and you're gonna take a big inhale and exhale, right? And I guarantee you, by the third inhale or exhale, there's going to be a distraction coming in, right?
Right.
But to a newbie, they're going to follow it for a little bit. But the key is the moment you recognize you're fleeting away, you have something to come back to. So you're like, oh, wait, I'm thinking. I'm not supposed to be doing that, Billy said. So I'm going to come back to just breathing. And then naturally, by the second breath again, you're going to drift apart. You're going to catch yourself and then come back. So that's one way. The second one is the more popular one across the world called Vipassana, or like a body scan. So like I take turns, right? What's my head feeling right now? And then I listen to the all the sensations going in my from my scalp to my like hair to my head to the skin of my face, and then I move on to my arm. Like, what's my arm feeling right now? And so basically, you're doing the breath like anapana across the body.
Okay.
So that's again realistically. You're gonna think about you're gonna focus on your head, and then naturally you're gonna drift apart to a distracting thought. But when you catch that, you come back. And the third is the Korean Zen, like, or in Korean it's called Sun, and it's probably the most abstract way of meditation. And but when I say right, uh, my dog is actually a fish. So when I say this to you, in your mind, you're probably like, "What the fuck is this guy saying?" Right?
Well, yeah, I'm like really into it, and I started like thinking like a fish dog. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're like, wait, but this guy's talking about meditation, and why is he suddenly saying like, his dog is a fish? What?
Right.
Okay, so there's a distinct zone that your mind enters when you enter like, wait, what? And it's this zone of like curiosity called a
Okay.
question mark, right?
Okay.
You you So this is why Zen meditation is typically done with the Zen master. The Zen master gives you some like ridiculous prompt, right? That's what koans do.
Oh, okay.
And you listen to that ridiculousness and you're like, what the fuck does that even mean? And so some of the popular ones are like, what should I do when I meet Buddha? The answer is, you beat him down and kill him. Another one is like, what is awakening? And the answer is It's the hair on your front tooth. So these,
Okay.
like, what the fuck,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's what I, yeah.
But the thing is, you you posture up, right? And you're not looking for the answer. You're holding on to that feeling of what the actual fuck.
Okay.
And every time, but then realistically, you're gonna be like, oh, wait, does he mean this? Oh, maybe this is what it means. So that's a distraction. The answer doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Okay, so it's the initial like sensation of like
What the
feeling it.
fuck?
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
You see, so
Right.
all three meditations all lead to the same kind of a root. Meditation is about relaxed focus. And I'll stop here because I think that answers your question
Yeah,
of
yeah, I
like,
like that.
what is meditation from the Buddhism perspective?
Okay. So so that's interesting because that sort of if I understand it right, that sort of means like and there being like sort of like no strict rules to Buddhism, uh a Western practitioner saying to a you know a like a random patient, you should try meditation without any necessarily type of direct like instructions for it, could they still go home and perform meditation? Like if they were simply told to sit there and breathe and try mindfulness, would that still qualify as meditation in your understanding?
It's better than nothing because we, as a society, we're drifting more and more towards spending as little time with ourselves
Right.
as possible in the day. So, throughout the day, you have all these distractions, right? And then the only time where you really have to yourself is like when you fall asleep, right? But that feels so uncomfortable for people. So people either get like knocked out or they doom scroll until they physically can't.
Right.
And when people wake up, first thing, right? So practice wise, if they just got the advice you should meditate a little bit, what's realistically gonna happen is they're gonna sit down and think
Yeah.
instead of like meditate.
Right.
But that's better than nothing because it opens up that channel where you're starting to be with yourself and nothing else. And every day it feels a little bit less intimidating. Every day it feels a little less scary. But side effect, if you have a bad relationship with yourself, right? You've been avoiding the school bully by doom scrolling, but then now every day you're gonna meet the school bully head on.
Right.
So, seen in that way, that's why it's probably best coupled with like therapy if you're gonna go for the Western like route,
Right.
right?
Right.
But in Buddhism terms, the goal and the like, there's no purpose to meditation, but like practically speaking, why we do it is to see and experience Buddha's teaching of there's no reason to suffer. So, Western meditation, Western ideas are like you can heal from the bully.
Yeah.
Buddhism, in its truest form, says there is no bully. Therefore, there's nothing to heal from. And it's that journey.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so would okay, so would the ideas of meditation be in conflict or counter to the ideas of like regular medication, like something even as simple as like a non psychoactive antidepressant. Would that be counter to ideas of Buddhism, or would that be able to work with some type of finding balance in yourself or something?
Oh, for meditation, you need to be able to think like at least some level of straight, right?
Hmm.
So I can meditate when I am a little tipsy. I can meditate when I'm super exhausted, right? But I have COVID right now, which is why my voice is a little bit different. But on Wednesday, right, I had a crazy fever, and I tried to meditate in that state.
Okay.
I can't because
Because you're ill.
the fever, right? It impacts the ability of the brain to like get itself in one piece. That's why people have like fever dreams and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So if you're ADHD, right? If you're bipolar, if you're autism, if your neurodivergence is contained and you can still have a functioning brain where you can think like and collect yourself, then you don't necessarily need medication. Like it's not a medicine, right?
Right.
It can help though. Like if you're on Adderall, like will it intensely help with the medication process? Maybe. But if it's to the point where your brain cannot hold on to a thought, it because not because of the lack of will, but more so because you physically cannot because of a problem,
Yeah.
then you need medication. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good answer for that. Um, Here, gotta refer back to my sheet. Okay, so I guess the last thing to wrap up the meditation part of the discussion is: are you concerned on any level with the Orientalist perspective on meditation? Um, Even if it's without like not necessarily causing harm, but just the maybe the misinformation, the misunderstanding of our physical world, or even the Buddhist perspective, or just in general being the prejudice angle of it. Do you think that what level of harm do you think would be caused by the Orientalist perspective?
That's the one where like people ascribe fantastical meaning to
Yeah,
things, right?
where it's a lot of the time it's like especially here in America, it's basically every type of Eastern medicine. Eastern medicine is not looked at by Western medicine, and it carries a special understanding with it that doesn't exist in the medicinal world, in the medical world, or isn't studied because it's um, um, metaphysical in some type of way, like magical thinking to some extent, which I'm not necessarily uh, against religious subscriptions, but it's more like the idea that people can perform magic and it's not being looked at. Do you think that's a harmless thought in people's minds, even if it might be something that can be done away with education?
No, I'm aware that these things are very harmful to the most. Okay, so suppose I prescribe I have a magic bean here, right?
Right.
And this magic bean, you just can't see it, but it really exists, okay? And it's gonna cure all of your problems, and it's one it's $1,000 per bean, and I sell it in 100 pack. Okay, so like, okay, who's realistically, right? In the entire spectrum of people, right? Most people aren't gonna buy this. So, which means we look at like economics, right? Okay, so this is a pen. Who buys pens? The people who have something to write, right?
Right.
This is a my face is really greasy, so I have a oil paper to kind of wipe down the grease because like just gets super oily. So, but to my wife, her skin is very dry, and she does a lot of like skincare, so she doesn't need this, right? It's the same item. It has value to me, but it doesn't have value to my wife. So, this magic bean, yeah? Who is it gonna benefit? Unfortunately, the people who are desperate, the people who are running out of realistic options. Yeah?
Yeah.
So this used to be one of my major gripes with the life coaching industry as well. Because coaching is taught to present itself as you can do anything with coaching, right? You can make six figures with coaching and blah blah blah. But you know how fucking hard it is to make six figures with coaching? Nobody really talks about that part. But in a room full of life coach training, right? What percent of them are there because they have no other way?
Yeah. I mean,
You'd be
that's like
surprised.
that's honestly the profession that you would pretty much guarantee most of the people there have it. Well, everybody has an issue. That's like guaranteed. Everybody is coming there for a personal problem in their life, right?
Yeah. So, in that vein, right? Meditation, like having all these being promoted as having all these magical qualities, that's fine, right? It's like saying that, when you look at the advertisement for like Heineken, which is like the, I don't know, kind of standard beer, right? It's not like that exceptional, but then
Right.
every time you look at the ad, it's like, oh my fucking god, like when I
Yeah.
open a Heineken, I'm gonna have this like
Yeah.
room full of friends, and I'm gonna watch fucking soccer with them, and I'm gonna,
Yeah. Okay. I like
so
that.
it's the same thing, but to a person, right, who is running out of options, and I say I'm a meditation teacher, and my sessions are two $20,000 for a year, and you need this because I can see that in your soul there's some blockages. And okay, so again, 90% of people, they're not gonna get this offer, but like this is of course assuming that I have ill intentions.
Yeah.
It just ends up harming the people who really like can't take it anymore. At the same time, right? This was a simplistic kind of an example of me kind of assuming ill will. But there are lots of practitioners who actually do a lot of good, right? There are meditation practitioners who actually genuinely know their shit. And I dabble in guiding people through meditations. I'm not like my primary occupation is a life coach, right? My primary occupation is leading people through like out of their suffering. But I do meditation as a side. So when somebody who is coming from a pure meditation angle looks at me, is there a possibility they see me as a quack? Totally, right? So the world is an intricate place, and there's always a different ways to view things. But I've taken the liberty of assuming some things about your question. So assuming ill will by the presenter, like how much harm is there? Realistically, not that much, but the harm usually tends to go to the vulnerable.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot to think about. And I really found that interesting. Um, the idea that people ascribe magical meanings to a lot of things, a lot of different activities, and a lot of different substances. It's just in the U.S. and in the Western world, these uh, they're not as quite as honest about it being a magical belief. Like it's sort of even like the Carl's Jr. cheeseburger ads with the hot ladies. It's um, putting an image to a ritual and sort of being like this benefits your life in some abstract way, separate from it just being sustenance, and maybe not even great for you sustenance. But yeah, what really would be the harm there other than the worst people? And maybe it sort of is up to us all to be a little bit more discerning and to look out for the vulnerable a little bit more with that.
Yeah,
you
and
know
that's why at the when you talk about suffering, right? You reach the same conclusion as you just did, right? Number one, it's up to individual discretion, and number two, we really gotta do a better job at taking care of the society's most vulnerable, and that is really aligned with Buddha's final teachings as he was about to die, right? And so because in Buddha's times, right? It was really noble of a person to offer food to Buddha because Buddha didn't grow his food, right? Buddha didn't get like like his disciples to like get food for him. No, Buddha begged for food like everybody else. So because Buddha was so respected, Buddha serving Buddha food, getting the opportunity to give Buddha food was a very noble thing. It's like a very like high karma kind of activity, right? And so around the time of Buddha's passing, people started wondering, right? Well, we get to do these really great acts of kindness, right? We get to really do these big acts of good by feeding Buddha. But when Buddha dies, right? Fuck, how do we accumulate the good acts when you're gone? And Buddha said, you know, there's a virtue that's equivalent to serving the Buddha, and it is feeding the hungry. That feeding the most hungry is equal in virtue to feeding me, the person you respect the most. And so when you really when you get sufficiently deep down the rabbit hole of any kind of particular suffering, number one, you have the power to break the illusion that this is the suffering, and number two, but for the people who don't have that capacity yet, right? You gotta really take care of them.
Okay. Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. Just in a like, and I think it's funny because being secular, I'm not too much into religions, but Buddhism is definitely the religion I admire the most. Not necessarily because all religions, for the most part, are you know geared towards the needy and helping the poor and a lot of that. It's just I find a lot of Western religion has been uh, sort of indoctrinated by a sort of bureaucracy that sort of has muddied it quite a bit beyond like any type of original teachings. Like there's a whole right-wing anti-welfare evangelical movement in the United States, which you would think would be contrary to like the teachings of Jesus, but it isn't to them. So and in the modern context, I don't see vigilant Buddhism and actually, as far as I'm aware, there's been a lot of recent prosecution in some Eastern countries uh, secularist nations. So it does swing both ways when it comes to how government use religions, and that's always something
Yeah.
people should recognize. But so we're gonna switch gears a little, and I want to bring up a couple current events and talk about a couple big ideas. So,
But before, I just want to mention
Okay.
that Buddhism also suffers from the same problem, right? There are definitely like a bunch of Buddhist orders that prosecute the minor religions in a
Right.
primarily Buddhist country, and like religions, they all, when you get to the root of it, they all saying the same thing, right? It's the same message, but it's always the people who fixate on things,
Yeah.
and that's what
And,
warps the
and
message.
a big misuse by government is a big thing, I think. In general, we can't let our culture divide us. Our cultures have to unite us, and we should find the positive similarities before the negative ones. And always understand that despotic rulers and cruel people, they're in the minority, and they're the ones who seek power, and that's why these issues exist in the first place. And yeah, that's of course true. And I'm sure, like anybody else, I am susceptible to my own types of assumptions and prejudices without knowing it. Like, of course, furthest away from the Buddhist world, so I probably know the least about the persecution by Buddhist governments. But I do want to talk about something that's sort of universal with a story that is maybe a little more local. So, how aware are you of like stories that happen in America?
I don't necessarily read the news all the time, so I mostly rely on my wife telling me things. So I guess that's yeah, I
Okay.
don't really actively follow up.
Yeah, you seem pretty active in your work, so I assume you probably don't want to be muddied down by a lot of stuff that isn't paying you. But so, did you ever hear about the Slenderman stabbings?
I don't think I have.
So there were these little girls. They were, I believe, like 12 when it happened. I'm sharing it on Discord if you want to click on it, but I'm gonna read it. It's the Slenderman stabbing hearing scheduled Monday for Morgan Geyser's petition for conditional release. So these were some young girls that attempted to murder another young girl in a few years ago, and it was like fueled by a lot of poor mental health, and the girls used internet myths of Slenderman as sort of like the catalyst for this, and they stabbed another young girl. I don't think they killed her, but they did stab her. They were 12 at the time, and she was found not guilty by reason of mental disease and was sentenced to a maximum of 40 years in state mental health supervision, but was granted conditional release in 2021. The article says right here, WISN 12 News, Sirius Sandlin spoke to a criminal defense expert about what this means. Miss Geyser is saying, I'm no longer a danger to myself or others, and so she has the right to file a petition for discharge to the community under a commitment setting. And now that she's filed the petition, a doctor will be appointed to examine her. She's currently being treated at State Mental Institute. So this whole thing is just sort of to segue into, and I'll just stop sharing that. A conversation about how you might feel about prosecution. So if someone commits a major wrongdoing in their life, what does Buddhism say about the punishment or the recourse for such a thing? Whether it be a violent assault or, even down to something such as theft.
The important thing with punishment, right, is that it is for a community, right, of people. So we have complete freedom in our will. So there's nothing stopping me from running away from this interview, like right now. There's nothing stopping me from grabbing this webcam and like chugging it at the
Yeah, just
wall and like,
completely going unhinged off the wall. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, right? Okay. So we live, that's just looking at our individual lives. But we also live in a community. We live in a society, right? And so when we live with other people, the degree of freedom implicitly gets kind of hampered, right? Because, like, if I acted like that with my wife, she would be very unhappy, right? If I was just like started dancing naked and then like running around the street barefoot.
Yeah.
So our actions tend to have a consequence in how other people perceive us, and especially when I start interacting with them physically or like with words and things like that, it has influence, right? Okay, so when there are people who repeatedly cause distress onto others, there is a need for the society as a collective, right? There's a need for that community. In order for it to thrive, they need to address it, right? So, seen in this way, it's very similar to like actual health at the blood level, right? A bacteria or like a virus comes in, white blood cells need to resolve it, right? If the white blood cells don't fight it, then the whole body dies. So, um, in your community, you were talking about cats, right?
Yeah.
So if the cat you are feeling distressed because of it, and you want to control it, right? So you're the first sort of white blood cell to arrive there, and then your like community manager wants to join in and like, hey, I want to, and then now you're trying to rally the other white blood cells to kind of resolve that, right?
Right.
If it doesn't, it may not, it maybe not in the immediate year or so. It's not going to
Yeah.
destroy your community, but metaphorically, you get what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Any type of, you could have an illness for years before it causes.
Yeah. So the in society, punishment and like containment and things like that is a way for society to keep itself healthy. Yeah. So it's up to the society to determine what the appropriate amount of like containment for this is. And that's why you see for many different types of acts, like the standards of punishment vary wildly, right? So, for example, in Korea, a lot of men install like hidden cameras in women's toilet stalls to like record them peeing, and then they sell it on the internet. But then, you know what? The law very much favors men, so these people just get out on probation and things like
Mhm.
that. Whereas in America, it's like
Yeah.
things are going to look pretty different,
Well,
right?
we even
And
had to install our own anti revenge porn laws, which were
yeah,
people jilted ex lovers posting intimate photographs of each other as revenge onto the internet. We had to make our own law because people weren't getting prosecuted for that. It wasn't technically like against the law.
yeah, and in Korea, police don't have the same kind of like stature as in America. So drunk people, they fight policemen.
Oh,
If you
okay.
did that in America, you'd like things would not go well for you, right?
No,
So
my
it
dad got away
depends.
with it, but I don't think he can anymore right now.
So like society and culture by culture, it's different. But I know what I'm about to say right now isn't really related to your question, but
No, go off.
the containment, right? After the containment, there's a very big lack of focus on why these crimes happened in the first place. And there's more emphasis on you fucking did
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm an angry guy, right? Suppose. And then I beat the shit out of a 12-year-old kid because I was angry. And then what you decide to do is like lock me up, and then now like guess what? I'm gonna be even more angry. And I know the jail system does do like therapy. Like I know it tries and it
Yeah.
tries to like,
Well, it
but
tries.
at the same time, this is a nation with like for-profit prisons and
Hmm.
like cases that people can't pay bail for. And then so what would have been with resources like a misdemeanor is like suddenly a 40-year charge, right? And this society focuses on like, oh fuck yeah, like the YouTube short videos of where like criminals get really like beaten down.
Yeah.
People really like short-term karma, and I think that's a very dangerous phenomenon for people to be going in, because life isn't as like that clear cut and black and white about who is in the right of what, right? Who is in the clear wrong. It's never that like clear. So that girl who stabbed another girl, have you stabbed another person?
I haven't.
But can you imagine the
Yeah.
amount of like, you would either need to be completely clueless or completely having lost access to your normal sane senses,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like you've sometimes chewed your own tongue before by accident, right? Or the
Mm.
chewed the inside of your mouth by accident.
I, yeah, yeah. I think I've done that. I've done other foolish things. In the
But
same vein.
that's usually how hard you bite when you eat food, right? So that's the amount of violence and that's the amount of like pure power potential that we carry every day. But when it comes time to apply it to another person, we have filters. Because why? We have empathy, right?
Right.
For me to turn that off requires a lot of impetus. And when we just strip all of that nuance away and say, "Oh, that girl is a demon," that's when things get like that way. It's just so much easier to make the case for like we should put her in jail forever.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's reacting to violence with violence.
Yes,
Uh,
and that's what makes the world go blind, right?
right. Right. And so, um, what about? Okay, so these are little girls, right? But what if I went and stabbed someone? Would you vouch for me?
I would be deeply interested in why you did that, right? But the thing is, regardless of what your intention is, you did it, right?
Yeah.
And in true Buddhism sense, is it a bad thing that you did? Nothing's really that bad, right? What if you prevented future Hitler? I don't know, right? What if that guy, like, it's like total like Minority Report shit, but like, what if
Yeah.
that guy was gonna be a child offender,
Yeah.
child predator in like 20 years, and you just put a halt to that 20 years in advance? Who
Well,
knows,
and that's
right?
the big thing. That's I mean, and Minority Report's a good thing to bring up. It's is it even if you know someone's about to do a crime, is it even appropriate to punish them prematurely if you know for sure they're going to commit the crime? What's the
Yeah.
difference if you're punishing them either way with violence? Um, uh,
But what matters for me is that you did that because you are suffering. And I would try my best to relieve you of your suffering, and so that you can receive your karma in a peaceful mind. I actually work with clients in jail. And that's living proof of that as long as you're alive, like you can be in a jail cell, but you cannot suffer.
right.
And if you did stab someone, you don't stab someone when you're not suffering. right?
I believe that.
So I want to remove your suffering so that you are free from the temptation to, if I get out, I'm gonna fucking stab like 10,000 more people. Because this happens in
Right,
like
right, right. Yeah,
especially in cultures where guns aren't that common.
yeah, yeah.
Like in
Absolutely.
Japan, there's a lot of like stabbings, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And,
but
and so the healing process, um, and sort of this sort of ties back into the despotism thing, right? If you're leaving your restoration up to oppressive forces, they're always going to use violence, right? So
it's easy.
yeah. So what do you do? Because I know, so the common refrain, and I'm everybody's heard this before. I'm sure you've heard this before. Is uh, if you don't want prisons, where are all the serial killers going to go? Right. So where do all the serial killers go?
It's not like I'm opposed to the idea of prisons itself, right? Like you need a place where it's basically like a psych ward, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm clinically insane and I'm threatening everyone with like broken glass shards, I need to be in a psych ward, right? So it's not that I'm against the idea of people staying in isolation so that they can get specialized care. It's that I'm more interested in social changes
Right.
so that there aren't like, do you play video games?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, and in video games, there's a lot of these ideas of like stacks, right? Like buff stack.
Yeah.
So like World of Warcraft, like I'm playing in a six-man like guild, and then like doing this giant raid, and oh good aura one, good aura two, good aura three. So that like on my paladin character is like usually hits things at this rate, but like with the buffs that stack, I'm like oh right, okay. So for me, and I take it you haven't killed another person, right?
No, it was hypothetical.
For me, for anyone to completely turn off all sense of preservation and go into that blind rage, it's not a few stacks of suffering. It's like generationally stacked suffering. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's like buffs that carry over character to character per account, right?
It's failure on all fronts.
And that is what I think we could be spending more time thinking about. And the part of my wife isn't really interested in being a U.S. citizen. I am because I want to get involved in civil movements.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we we need it. I mean, uh, so what what do you think is the best language to communicate to someone the idea of forgiving the criminal? You know, allowing someone to be rehabilitated and uh, treated for the things that caused them to do this, and then re-enter society without stigma.
The most important thing is forgiveness is totally optional. Like, if I slapped you, what's the easiest thing that comes to your mind? You want to slap me back, right? If I hug you, what's the easiest thing that you want to do? Hug me back, right? It's just how the world works. So if I slap you and I get angry at you because you don't forgive me, like that's out of line for me, yeah?
Yeah.
So I understand that forgiveness isn't for anyone. And you know what? Like, I don't want you to forgive other people, like, if you don't need to, right? But you probably know this by now. I'm very tough on suffering, right? When you when you hate someone, you wouldn't like people don't fully grasp how much suffering that invites onto your life when you hold on to hate for someone.
Right.
Like, suppose I hate, I don't know, for the sake of like argument, suppose I hate Joe Biden, right? Doesn't do anything to Joe.
Yeah.
Just
Especially.
makes me feel really,
Yeah.
really bad.
Yeah.
But forgiveness, right? So I'm not necessarily interested in me forcibly having people forgive people, but you gotta understand that the more that resentment and the more it harbors onto you, and the more you rely on your anger translating into actual punishment and suffering for that person for you to be happy,
Right.
who's in charge of your happiness?
Yeah.
It's not you. Your happiness will now depend on the legal system, right? And I know, unfortunately, so many people who have been wronged, but it always works the other way around too, right? There's a lot of people who do lots of criminal activities, but with really excellent representation, or due to a startling lack of evidence, they walk away scot-free, right? This actually destroys the victims' lives.
Yeah.
So karma is like this a giant game of hot potato. And the thing that you have to understand about forgiveness isn't this. It's not holding on to this potato and like you like being in pain because like oh you're trying to be noble and you're trying not to pass the potato and it's hurting so much. Forgiveness is ultimately coming to a long process of recognizing that there is no hot potato. There's nothing to forgive because there was no harm done. And this is hard when you're a victim.
Yeah.
But it is more freeing than any sentence that anyone might receive.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. It's more about letting go of hate than embracing forgiveness necessarily. Uh, um. Yeah. So there's another thing that I want to talk to you about.
The Food and Drug
Okay.
Gas station heroin.
Yeah.
Food and Drug Administration
Okay, I can turn this up.
about a potentially addictive dietary supplement that's widely available in the U.S. Ali Rogan has the latest.
The FDA is asking Americans not to purchase or use any products from the supplemental brand Neptune's Fix. It contains a substance called tianeptine. Some countries have approved the drug to treat depression and anxiety. It's unapproved in the U.S., but readily available on store shelves and online. It's been nicknamed gas station heroin, and it can be highly addictive. An uptick in use has led the FDA to issue several warnings about tianeptine and its potential side effects, including seizures, loss of consciousness, and death. Dr. Peter Cohen is an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and joins me now. Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. Can you explain exactly what tianeptine is?
Sure, Ali. Tianeptine is a pharmaceutical drug originally produced in Europe as an antidepressant. Unfortunately, at higher levels, it can be addictive, and for that reason, it's not gotten widespread use. It has never been approved for use for any medical reason in the United States.
If it has not been approved for use, how is it that it can be sold in the United States?
So what we see as a common and sadly tragic pattern is that many companies take foreign drugs and introduce them directly to consumers in the United States by selling them as if they are dietary supplements. And they just appear on the market and start selling them to consumers.
We spoke earlier to two health professionals who have seen patients who have been using tianeptine, and I want to play some of what they told us.
These patients definitely have increased heart rates, they're very agitated, and they will admit that they use a lot of the product. So in other words, that they're using it very routinely, that they've built up such a high tolerance to it and a craving for it that that they'll go to great lengths to get it. The presentation of the withdrawal is going to be very similar to somebody who would potentially be going through oxycodone withdrawal, heroin withdrawal.
We were putting a fair number of people actually in our intensive care units. And we had to put them in there just because they were becoming so agitated, so confused. There was concerns for heart problems, concerns for, people having seizures. And so some people, like with many withdrawal patterns, may just feel a little bit uncomfortable. A fair number of people get very, very ill and require very close monitoring with it.
You heard that last doctor say a fair number of people that he's seeing. Do we have a sense of just how big this problem is with this substance?
Yeah, it's really ticked up over the last decade. So back before 2015, we had never heard of tianeptine here. And poison control calls, reports to the FDA, very serious ones like that were described, from seizures to stopping breathing to the point of intubation and deaths, have all been reported, and they're coming in more frequently.
The FDA has issued several warnings over the past 6 years. And we should also note here that Neptune's Fix has agreed to a voluntary recall. But are warnings all that the FDA can do? Why are their hands seemingly so tied?
Right. So there's two problems here. One is how it got on the market in the first place. And that's because there's no need for companies to vet products that they sell as dietary supplements with the FDA before they're being sold. That's a major problem and would require a change to the law. But there's a second major problem here, which is that the FDA has been aware of tianeptine being imported into the United States since 2015. That's been 9 years. And like you mentioned, it was in 2018 when they first warned about tianeptine. So the fact that it's been many years since the FDA was aware of the risks and has done nothing other than issue warnings to consumers and to the company is frankly embarrassing, as they're neglecting their responsibility
honestly,
to protect
that's all we
from
need to
dangerous dietary supplements.
Does this represent?
So, so I'm sort of a big proponent of legalization of basically all recreational substances. And the reason why is because, we have, a lot of research for drugs that already exist. And we could properly dosage those and have, a regulated market for something like that, as opposed to an environment where we're usually just chasing our tail while companies could sort of introduce a drug that isn't regulated because there's no legislation for it yet, and it's a drug that could potentially be more harmful. We've seen things like this in the past. There's this thing called on the streets, it's called Lagel, or K2 is the name of a brand, but it's this stuff that's sold as incense in the US, and it's sold as fake weed in legal states. And it's basically a combination of psychoactive, like garden plants, that it's very, very strong, like a completely different. It's like it's a menagerie of multiple drugs combined into like a smokable form of completely unregulated like things. For all people know, they're smoking nightshade, and when there's alternatives that are less harmful, according to all research, that are overregulated and carry a substantial penalty, putting people in prison for having less harmful substances while allowing companies to sell more harmful substances. It seems like to me it belies a pretty deep hypocrisy with the drug war type of system. How do you feel about stuff like that? Did you I mean, I'm sure you've taken much higher level like a course or something involved. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, this is referencing your earlier point, but like, if alcohol is like around, alcohol in high doses can just like kill in the same day, right?
Yeah.
And Koreans love to drink. Like in my 20s, my hobby was getting blacked out. Cause
It is for lots of 20-year-olds.
I enjoyed that feeling because it felt like pressing the reset button here. Like I puke a lot, and then the next morning I wake up, I remember nothing. And at the time, that feeling was refreshing. Now I'm thinking about it, it's like stupidest thing ever, right? But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is like, yeah, you're right. Like, if alcohol can be around like this freely, why can't all the other like recreational drugs, right? But um, now realistically, it'll all follow the money, right?
Right.
And no matter how much we want to deny it, no matter how much we try to like think about it, it's related to politics and the way that politics is structured in America. It has to follow the money, right? Because bills and laws and they're all
Lobbyists.
influenced by money, right?
Yeah.
And so pharmaceutical companies like that pharma bro, like Martin Shkreli, like could be just a pharma guy, but again, like got eventually ended in jail because of money, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
as long as there's like a big name capital firm funding something and versus not, I think danger aside, that will be what really drives what gets regulated versus not, what actually becomes possible to purchase or not, and things like that. And for other things, I mean, unfortunately, it will be always one step late. Like somebody will die from overdose of something, and then it'll actually probably get more strictly regulated.
Yeah.
Because why? Our systems aren't really like. Don't get me wrong; they're not doing a bad job. It's not like they suck or anything, but it's just that because it is tied to the law, and because the legal system involves politics, and because politics in America get powered through capital, I'm just more or less saying it's inevitable that it will relate to big amounts of capital.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, that's definitely it is probably very related to why certain drugs are regulated and under the control of our FDA, and some are villainized and under the attack of the DEA. So yeah, that's definitely what's going on. Yeah. I really think that there will be some type of eventual reckoning when it comes to stuff like that. But it, like you said, it'll come after people have overdosed, but it'll also come after people have died in prison over,
Yeah. And but that's how. So there's a German philosopher named Hegel, and his theory on the development of society in general is that there's a strong thesis, right? There's a strong current. And because of that strong current of a direction of a society, it impacts most people well. right? But it impacts some people very adversely, and it gives birth to an antithesis. So these two will fight, and then it will eventually, this fight and this struggle will eventually give birth to a hybrid of these things called a synthesis. And then from that point on, the synthesis will be the new thesis, which brings about, and the cycle continues, right?
Right.
And this has been this has been the case for humanity for ages. Hegel's a really old guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. For the audience, if you ever hear someone say Hegelian dialectic, that's
Yep,
what
yep.
that is. Yeah, and that's absolutely true. It's the inevitable wave of social progress.
Yes.
It's unfortunate how much suffering it usually costs. Is that sort of something Buddhism addresses? Is like how suffering makes way for progress? Like, is that like because I know there's so I think the only thing I ever learned in school about Buddhism was about fasting, and it was very short, and it was in elementary school, but it was like the deprivation of material like um possessions or something. That's how the school described it to me. What's the truth on that?
Well, in Buddhism, in essence, nothing really means anything, right? But at the same time, the core of Buddhism is this: everything is interrelated, whether by space or time. This thing is my headphone, but when you actually think about it, it's just a bunch of electric parts. So if I just bring the parts into a bucket, is it the same thing as this? No, right? So the parts are bound by space. They are related by space. But has this always been my earphone? Did this exist in 2000 BC? No, right? So it is my earphone bound by time, right? So whatever I do, whatever like I am today, the cellular composition of me today, the things that I'm wearing today, the poop I poop today, the pee I pee today, the things that I eat today, it's a way of interconnecting with the world, regardless of what I do. But the thing is, if I rely on that and start beating the shit out of my wife, that's not really cool for my wife, right?
Right.
So I minimize the footprint of the suffering that I may be inflicting upon others. So that's why Buddha, right? He's not asking for fresh food when he begs. He's asking for the leftover you're gonna throw away. What Buddha wear, that clothing, isn't like clothing he bought. It's cloth that was wrapped to throw away corpses that were too like impure to be burned at the Ganga River. So Buddha is really teaching about using things that exist. Don't care about what other people think about it. Like, just minimize your footprint because I'm Buddha. I need more respect. Like, that's like your footprint, right? Buddha is saying, no, like, you're just here. And so I'd say it's about minimizing footprint.
Okay.
But the thing is, even with that, right? Even if Buddha is feeding on leftovers, now someone can say, well, Buddha is then depriving the stray animals from eating that leftover food, yeah? Buddha is depriving mushrooms and the worms from eating that food. So the point here is that life, regardless of how pure your intentions are, is built on unintentionally depriving others, unintentionally inviting suffering into other people. So, with your consciousness, because you do these acts unconsciously, you offset the balance of the karma by intentionally doing lots of acts of good. That's what the noble path in Buddhism is ultimately guiding you towards.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I just before we wrap things up, like I just want to say, like I love your channel. I'm like a lurker of it. I sort of just you know I don't have a lot of like social interaction out in the real world because I stay at home and take care of my daughter a lot of the time. And even then I'm a bit of like a loner. So I go out and I try to like sort of engage with people online in a more substantial way than social media. I just kind of get in arguments on social media. So that's just all to say, like before we spoke, I did consider you like a parasocial friend. I hope now we can consider each other mutual friends at this point. I think
I have
you're
already decided that
awesome.
everyone in the world is my actual friend.
Right.
So, regardless of how you felt about me, you are always my genuine friend.
Well, that's great to hear. Before we go, just you know, sort of new structure of the show, same as the old structure of the show. I usually have my co-host plug their like stuff, but if you want to just shout out your channel and tell people where to find you.
Hey, right. So, hi, I'm Billy, but my brand name is July Life Coach. So I'm on YouTube as July Life Coach, and you know, I coach people in one-on-one containers. I have a monthly program, 6-month program. It's a standard life coaching thing, right? I also do business coaching, but I make enough money to get by myself, right? And so instead of really plugging for my business, I want to plug a nonprofit organization that I work with in Honolulu, Hawaii, and it's called Spill the Tea Cafe. Spill the Tea Cafe is a care safe space for specifically for LGBTQ youth. Hawaii has a teen suicide problem. And I advocate that as long as you're alive, you can be happy. Well, the alive part turns out to be pretty important in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And if you can bring your attention to Spill the Tea Cafe and make small donations, no matter how small the amount, that would be great for me.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. All right, so it was that's the show. Then the song will play.